Thank you to the Arkansas Municipal League for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. I also want to repeat Rick's recognition of Arvis Bank for sponsoring this session. As we'll discuss a little later in the next hour, community, locally oriented banks can be a real support for the efforts to create healthy, walkable communities. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm very grateful to George on the technical desk for helping me out, because I'm going to be flipping between some different modes here. And a little later in this presentation, I'm going to invite Rick, Mayor Jill Dabbs from Bryant, and Mayor Frank Hash from El Dorado to participate in a panel discussion about how local elected officials in small communities and large communities can promote walking and walkability. So I have my clicker here. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, probably the wrong direction. Challenged, I'm afraid. George, which way do I, or somebody, which way do I, which one of these buttons do I use? To the right. Got it. All right, thank you. So, my name is Ian Thomas. I'm the State and Local Program Director with America Walks. America Walks is a national education and advocacy organization focused on encouraging people to walk more often, but connected to that, promoting the creation of walkable places, walkable communities, walkable neighborhoods, business districts, employment centers. And one of the facts of the late 20th century is that we engineered walking out of our lives to a very large degree in a lot of parts of our cities and across our states and across the country as a whole. And that's had some very negative impacts in a lot of areas: health and safety and economic activity, environmental impact, quality of life, tourism, all kinds of areas have been negatively impacted. So America Walks' mission and goal is to reverse those trends, to start creating places, and typically the centers of towns are the best places to start because they were designed that way in the first place, to make great places for people to walk. One of the reasons that walkable places are great places and are beneficial to cities is because they bring people together. And when people come together in large numbers, trade and commerce happens, community happens, discussion happens between people, and we create great communities by starting with walkable places. As Rick mentioned, I'm also an elected official myself. I've finished my first 3-year term as a member of the City Council in Columbia, Missouri, just a few hours north of here, a college town in the middle of the state of Missouri. And I got reelected 2 months ago for another 3-year term. And creating healthy, economically vibrant activities in Columbia is a big part of my platform as a council member in Columbia. So I'm going to talk about the top 5 reasons that local officials want walkable communities. And then in the discussion with Rick and Jill and Frank, we're going to discuss how communities can move towards those. And just very briefly, we see here those 5 big topics that I'm going to hit on during this session. All of them very important for local officials: traffic safety, public health, social justice, your transportation budget, and I'll just add a little postscript to that, which I'll get into in more detail. The cost of building a wholly or almost entirely car-oriented community is immense, and we can actually cut costs dramatically by in the long term by focusing on creating places that are safe and inviting for people to walk and ride bicycles, and by improving transit systems in communities of appropriate size. And then economic development, which I think you'll see when we get to our panel discussion, is a theme through the cities of Batesville, Bryant, and El Dorado, where focusing on walkability, focusing on people-oriented design has improved the local economy quite significantly. I have spent some time in Arkansas. As Rick mentioned, I did visit Batesville. I visited Batesville a few times, did some work there in 2014, and we're going to talk about that. And then I was back last year here in Little Rock, working with the Arkansas Department of Health and the Arkansas Highway and Transportation Department on those two agencies more intentionally participating together in a statewide plan to create more walkable, bikeable, safe, economically vibrant communities across the state of Arkansas. And we did a workshop last August and really created a great action plan. We looked at some of the work going on at the local level, and the locals talked about how the state could assist with these efforts. And following my presentation, I want to just kind of give a heads up that Jesse Jones with the Transportation Planning and Policy Division, the head of that division, will be talking about the Arkansas State Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. So I hope you'll stay for that. Earlier today, Mayor Stadler encouraged you all to steal ideas whilst you're here, and so I want to ask you to steal my ideas, the things we're talking about. These are demonstrated best practices in the area of creating more walkable, livable communities, and encourage you to steal those. The mayor also hit upon the program that he's doing with the schools here, and how important it is to promote healthy lifestyles and healthy attitudes among young people, so that valuing our health, valuing our environment grows up through the generations. So, is this a walkable community? This is a very typical scene in most American cities. The business loop, the 5-lane state highway that is entirely populated on both sides by drive-in, drive-through type businesses, no sidewalks, no crosswalks, a tremendous amount of traffic, wide driveways. If you look very closely at that picture, right in the middle, you can see a man with red trousers halfway across the street. He's trying to get from the business on one side across to the Hardys on the other, and this is what he has to go through. Every now and again we hear about tragic stories in large cities where somebody gets killed whilst trying to attempt to cross a road like this where no provisions are provided. Oops. So here are some other not walkable neighborhoods where sidewalks have decayed, where sidewalks were never built, where the sidewalks are not adequate for the people who need to use them. And our transportation planning has forgotten about a lot of people who have to get around our communities by walking or by bicycling in many cases. And this is something that we need to reverse. It sounds like this is a budget item, that this is something else on top of all of the important civic issues that we're all dealing with that we have to carve out from the budget. But the fact is, in the bigger picture, in the longer term, we're going to save money. We're going to spend a lot less on building transportation infrastructure for cars if we can build good transportation infrastructure for people, because we're going to limit the amount of driving that needs to be done. And there's a number of different aspects to that. So what does a walkable neighborhood look like? And I've got some pictures of different walkable neighborhoods here just to kind of help you visualize this. I'm sure you know some of them in towns that you're from or nearby. But the important thing is that it's not only an urban phenomenon. You can create pleasant, walkable, safe, accessible pathways in rural areas, in small towns, in suburban areas. It's a question of studying what people need in order to accomplish their acts of daily living, to achieve recreation in that town, and then studying the design of the infrastructure you have and how to retrofit it. It's really not very expensive, and it yields tremendous benefits. But to really explain in a more articulate way than I can about what a walkable community is, I've got a video queued up of one of my mentors and a consultant who came with me to Batesville back in 2004, Dan Burden. And Dan Burden will give his definition of a walkable neighborhood. Do we have some audio, George?
I am Dan Burden. I'm the Executive Director for the Walkable and Livable Communities Institute. A walkable neighborhood is a right-scale neighborhood where you can walk, you have good street connectivity, streets that are reasonably quiet and peaceful that relate to people living there, shopping there, enjoying their neighborhood, and really an opportunity for all things to work together. Homes watching over the street. Destinations, you have to have destinations. That means parks and stores and all the things that we, over many years, blended out of neighborhoods, now coming back. Walkability is actually a cornerstone of what we can refer to as an affordable community, a sustainable community.
George, you can
one that's got staying
pause it
power.
there and I'll pick up later. Thank you. So Dan there talks about having destinations. That's really important. One of the results of modern zoning codes is that we have large areas of residential development, large areas of commercial development, the shopping mall, areas of industrial, areas of office, big office parks. But each of these areas is far from the other ones, and everybody has to travel by car in between. More traditional urban design had these uses mixed together. And it's understandable that people don't want to live in an industrial area, but most people don't mind living with a small office district or a small grocery store, coffee shop, bookstore, the kind of mixes of uses that allow people to do a lot of their activities by walking between these destinations. So zoning code is a particular strategy that local officials can use to encourage more mixed-use zoning. So I am going to go through some of these reasons that elected officials like walkable neighborhoods, how it solves some of your problems. The first one is traffic safety. Pedestrian deaths and serious injuries in the U.S. have been increasing quite rapidly in the last few years, and a lot of people are a bit puzzled by that. Probably the reason is that more people are walking. It's not really that our roads are getting any less safe. If anything, the opposite's happening, but more people are getting killed while walking, more people are getting seriously injured by walking, and more people want to walk. The young generation, the millennials, are very clear that they don't necessarily want to own a car, that they would like to live in a place where they can walk for a lot of their things. If they're at college, where they can walk to classes or maybe take a bus, that they can get to local coffee shops or get to a job that they do to support their life as a student. We think more people are out walking, and as a result, they're in the firing line more. So we really have to focus on making our streets safer. This shows that the key factor in making our streets safer for pedestrians is speed. Each of those lines of a different color represents a particular age group. The red one at the top is the oldest age group, 65 and older. The pale orange one at the bottom is children, 14 and younger. And the ones in between represent different age groups in between. The vertical axis shows the likelihood of getting killed when you are hit by a car, and the horizontal axis shows the vehicle speed of that collision. And you can see that as the speed of the collision increases, the likelihood of getting killed increases dramatically. And so in areas where we have pedestrians, or we want to have pedestrians, we have to find out a way to slow down the traffic so that A, people don't get killed or injured, and B, so that people actually are encouraged to come out and walk because they're not fearful of being hit by a car. The great news is that the strategies are really working. There is a national movement called Vision Zero, which lays out as a fundamental principle of transportation system design and operations three really key philosophies. Firstly, the most important factor in transportation planning is safety, not getting somebody from the starting point to their destination as quickly as possible, not getting the most number of vehicles through an intersection in an hour as we can. It's safety. That's the number one philosophy. Oh, they're all number one by the looks at it. Something went wrong with my technical skills again. Number two is that all traffic deaths and serious injuries are preventable and therefore unacceptable. And we know that traffic deaths and serious injuries are preventable. If we simply controlled the speeds on the road, we could eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries. But we don't, because there's a culture of acceptance around it, which Vision Zero rejects. Because they are preventable, we need to state that they are unacceptable and save lives. And then the third thing is that transportation systems should be designed so that user errors are not fatal. A lot of crashes, a lot of deaths and injuries happen because of errors by drivers or pedestrians or bicyclists. But we should design our system so that you can make a mistake without having to die for it. And by those three simple principles, several cities have dramatically reduced not just the pedestrian deaths and injuries, but motorist deaths and injuries as well. The two plots on the right come from New York City. They introduced a Vision Zero policy in 2014, and those last two bar lines show in the upper plot the number of pedestrian deaths in those 2 years compared with the previous 15 years, and in the lower plot the total traffic deaths. And this is a safety measure not just for pedestrians or bicyclists, but for drivers as well. This saves lives and eliminates serious injuries. So that's safety. Everybody wants a safe city. And I will just add that there's the other aspect of public safety. There's good evidence that when you create walkable communities, you actually reduce crime in those areas as well, because you get lots of law-abiding people out on the sidewalks in the downtown, in the community, and that is a crime deterrent program right there. So traffic safety and public safety. Public health is a very major benefit of walkable communities. I'm going to focus first on children. In 1969, half of all American children walked to school. By 2006, that had fallen to less than a third of what it was. And guess what? Guess what else happened in that same time? There you can see the green line, the U.S. children who walk or bike to school, falling from 1969 to 2006 down to 15%. The U.S. children who are overweight or obese almost quadrupled during that same 35-year period, from 8% to 30%. And that's a terrible indictment on the policies of this generation, that we've created cities and counties and states and a nation in which more than 30% of our youth are overweight or obese, because those young people grow up to be overweight or obese adults and really just have terrible life outcomes with illness and disability and medication. And by creating walkable communities, we can dramatically reduce that. This is a plot showing adult obesity across the country. The two states with the highest obesity level at present are Mississippi and West Virginia. You'll see a large swath of the South and the lower Midwest in that high obesity category. I don't have it here, but those of you that have been involved in public health may have seen the video in which the state's level of obesity is plotted every year over a 20-year period, and you can see since the 1980s this blossoming, this growth of overweight and obese people. It's not only about physical activity. Nutrition certainly has a major role in this as well, but physical activity is about half of it, and people are less physically active because we don't have walkable places. And finally, on public health, here's an interesting plot showing the relationship between the level of obesity and what we call mode share in transportation, namely the percentage of trips that are taken by walking, biking, or transit. And it's important to remember, while transit is not a physically active mode of transportation in itself, when you take a bus ride or a train ride, you have to get to that bus stop or get to that train station. And most people will walk to do that. Sometimes people will bike. A lot of buses, I think I saw it here in Little Rock, have bike racks on the front. So you can bike to the bus, put your bike on the bus, and then get off at the other end and bike the last bit if it's a little far from the bus stop. But looking at that plot, it's showing different countries, but this is a general relationship that the higher the proportion of trips that are taken by walking, biking, and transit, the lower the obesity level. And the USA is at the left end of that, with a very low level of trips taken by walking, biking, or transit, just 5%, and a 30% obesity prevalence. The third reason that you should be really interested in making your community more walkable is social justice. And I want to applaud Clarence Anthony for his presentation earlier and his focus on how cities must address social justice issues. People are stuck in a cycle of poverty where they really don't have a hope to get out. And a part of that is transportation. But I appreciate hearing politicians and national leaders speak up for underserved people in our communities all across the country. And in fact, I made a note that Clarence said, go for a walk in your community in an area where you don't usually go. And I just thought it was really wonderful that he said go for a walk there and see what people's lives are like. A lot of people don't have access to a car, and if there's not a good bus system, it's very hard to hold down a job. It's very hard for kids to get to school or to have a social life with their friends. It's hard for people to do their shopping and their activities of daily business. And a big part of the reason is that it's extremely expensive to own a car. This is the average cost according to the AAA, in 2013, depending on how many miles per year you drive, the average car owner spends anywhere from nearly $8,000 to over $10,000 per year. And that includes paying off the loan for the car, but also a lot of other costs that are listed there for the 15,000 miles a year: taxes and registration, insurance, gas, maintenance, financing, and depreciation. That's out of reach for a lot of people. Now, certainly a lot of poorer people have older cars that cost less than this, but this is the average, and it's a significant cost, and it's a significant reliability factor. Another social justice issue is the way that a lot of high-speed highways cut through our poorest neighborhoods. I'm certain that there are examples of this in Little Rock and in cities across the state of Arkansas. I know there are in Columbia. In fact, these pictures show one of those in Columbia, Providence Road. It's a state highway that goes right through the traditionally black neighborhood of Columbia, which is now a public housing area and is still a neighborhood of poverty. And there was a bridge there originally built in the 60s that was not accessible to somebody who couldn't, who traveled in a wheelchair. It was very difficult for moms with babies in strollers, and so people would cross the street at grade and put themselves at risk because there was no other safe way to cross for nearly half a mile in each direction, and that was the place to cross. One of the projects that we did was to take that bridge down, which nobody liked. People felt it was unsafe to be on the bridge in case there might be somebody, an attacker up there. So we took the bridge down in Columbia a few years ago and replaced it with this crosswalk with a push-button system. And one of the most exciting things is that children now move through the neighborhood on their own. There's a park on one side and public housing on the other. There's a pool at the park. There's also a school on this side. And you now see kids using this. So another example of social justice where children were not able to move safely around their neighborhood before. Their parents wouldn't let them. Now we've made it safe, and the traffic stops when somebody presses that button. And another group that is unjustly discriminated against through poor transportation system design is people with disabilities. And we see examples here of infrastructure. All of these pictures are taken in Columbia, Missouri as well, where we are working to improve the infrastructure so that disadvantaged people have the same access and the same opportunities as everybody else. Just checking my notes here, if there was anything else I wanted to add. Oh, I know where we were. Yes, actually, George, could you run that next segment of the Dan Burden interview at this time, where he talks about the cost of sidewalks? I think
you've got to start with the model projects. We've allowed a lot of our existing infrastructure, such as sidewalks, to get so worn and badly conditioned that we now look at repairing sidewalks or building new sidewalks as a huge added cost item. It's not. The big cost is not having access to walking, bicycling, good social interaction in front of our house. Repairing sidewalks we can do at very affordable rates. And indeed, what's really cool, if cities take it on as a practice to take a 10-block area at a time, be willing to put them all under contract at once, and do it at a very affordable contracted price, we can get the sidewalk construction down to a very low level. And a lot of cities are now learning to do that. And the cool thing, it employs far more people and costs less than doing an equivalent project on a major road. Just a few.
Thank you. So important thing that Dan said there, it's not actually expensive to systematically, over a period of time, improve your sidewalks. Rick did this in Batesville, and he'll talk about that in a minute. You do need to allocate some funds, or you need to build some private support to assist the city in making these changes, but the payoff is enormous. So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. It mainly says that the way that we're doing transportation in our cities and across the country is unsustainable. Our roads are getting in worse and worse repair, and we have no money to even maintain them, let alone continue expanding the system, which we're still doing, or which certain political forces are still trying to make happen. Widen highways, add new highways. We should be looking to improve conditions in the urban centers, and then gradually spreading out for alternative modes of transportation as a budget balancing exercise. Important statistic at the bottom there. In the United States, 25% of all trips are 1 mile or less. That's a distance that a lot of people can walk. And 50% of trips, half of all trips taken, are 3 miles or less. And that's a distance that a lot of people can ride a bicycle to school or to work. And yet, over 90% of all trips are taken by car at the moment. So the patterns of trips that people are taking lends itself to more walking and biking. Why don't they? Generally because the infrastructure isn't safe or inviting for them. Cost of a 5-foot sidewalk is anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000 per mile. Cost of a 4-lane highway, somewhere between $4 and $20 million per mile. And part of the reason that we are still in a mode of building too many highways is that we have seen driving increase really ever since the car was invented, except for the last 10 or 20 years. It's leveled off. People are not driving more. And you can see those colored lines represent the U.S. Department of Transportation's prediction for how much people will drive in the future. And the black line shows what actually happened. And you can see that since about 2003, it's just leveled off. And this one shows the vehicle miles traveled per person in the United States. And it peaked in about 2004, and it's been falling ever since. So people are driving less on average, and a big part of that is the younger generation is driving less. And they're coming to occupy a larger and larger component of our entire population. Here's an example of a walkable community project from Brooklyn, New York, and we're going to talk about economic development and the economic benefits of creating walkable communities. The lower right is the after picture, and it's a fairly simple project. A median was put down the middle, put some landscaping, some trees to create a more attractive visual appearance, and then one of the car lanes was taken away and a bicycle lane was put in so that people actually started biking, and the cars are going slower. The fascinating thing is that business boomed. The green line there shows Vanderbilt Avenue in Brooklyn, the relative sales compared to a parallel street in the same neighborhood and compared to the city of Brooklyn as a whole, which are the pink and blue lines. They take off in 2007, which is when planning for that walkable project started, and continue to extend that gap after the project was finished in 2008, and that goes through to 2011. People like to be on that street now, so they're there and they buy things in the shops and they go in those cafes.
In Bryant, we wanted to have a more walkable community, but we started with the policy. That was what was recommended. We had the opportunity for Dan Burden to come and visit our community, and he really opened our eyes up to what the opportunity was. One of his comments I'll never forget was Bryant is a blank slate, and we had a lot of opportunity with the growth that was coming our way to answer to that growth in a very responsible way in relating to how we built out our streets. And had a lot of discussion around how we'd built our streets since the 1950s after World War II and what needed to change moving forward. So we went to work on our complete street policy, and now when streets are being built or rebuilt or rehabbed in the city of Bryant, the pedestrian, the cyclist, and all modes of transportation are taken into consideration as well as the vehicle. And we're seeing a slow, it'll take some time, but getting that policy in place was the very first step to really building out a complete walkable community.
Great, thanks, Jill. So a complete streets policy is a great strategy at the local level to set the tone for how streets should be built and rebuilt when that's necessary. Mayor Frank Hash, you worked with the planning and architecture firm Craft & Tull to develop a walkability master plan. Tell us a bit about that plan and why it was a priority for El Dorado.
Well, working with Craft & Tull is really ongoing right now. We started a number of years ago of improving our downtown sidewalks. El Dorado is the county seat for the largest geographical county in the state. A lot of court traffic there, a lot of downtown revitalization going on. A lot of well-meaning things have happened. Trees were planted kind of haphazardly, and they really destroyed the sidewalk and was causing quite a bit of problem. So we started revitalizing the sidewalks for folks to get around. It significantly increased retail sales downtown, the revitalization of the downtown, also service of folks going to the courthouse. The way we got actually with Craft & Tull was one of our aldermen is a bike enthusiast, and we have a number of bike enthusiasts there in El Dorado. And we also was a visit from Mr. Burton came down. And so all this coming together, along with the highway department, is revitalizing 82B from one side of the city to the other. A great opportunity to improve the biking and walking facilities on that width of that, and also interconnecting a number of our parks and playgrounds. So that's how we got into it. It's ongoing and it's doing quite well. There's many more of the things if we have time, we'll talk about what's going on.
Great, thank you, Frank. And turning to Mayor Rick Ellenbaugh of Batesville, you invited Dan Burden and myself to come to evaluate your downtown and engage the community in a plan for revitalization. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, you know, first of all, the city of Batesville is the oldest city in the state of Arkansas. And of course, you know, sometimes your infrastructure starts to crumble. In our Main Street area, a lot of the businesses there, that's where our history started, on the Main Street. We're in a historic district, and it was time to do something. You know, all the storefronts were becoming empty, and so we invited, you know, Dan and Ian to come there to come up with a plan to revitalize the area.
Yeah, great. And we actually have some pictures here. George, there we go. You want to talk us through these pictures, Rick?
Okay, you can, I think the far left there, you can see that's where our streetscape actually has started there. We had a 2-lane area, and it was almost like a racing thoroughfare through the city of Batesville. And then you can see the other one, we changed to diagonal parking. And you can see the streetscape, you can see the planters. It also provided, we had parallel parking on both sides of the road, and it was one way with a 2-lane. And you could see, you know, folks would probably go 30 and 40 miles an hour down Main Street. So we ended up taking out all of the stoplights, and we reduced the speed limit down to 10 miles per hour. And we also reduced it down to 1 lane. And you can see where the orange cones are located there. That's actually where streetscape. We have completed the first block, and we're just about to start on the next revitalization of the rest of the blocks. And then you can see some other businesses, and I'll elaborate on in just a few minutes.
Great, thank you, Rick. Jill, turning back to you, I know that in your work you focused on connecting Bryant's schools with the neighborhoods where the children live. Why was that so important to you?
If you've been in Bryant before school starts in the morning or in the afternoons, we have an incredible amount of traffic congestion, and we've been working with the schools on a master plan to better connect the neighborhoods to the schools. We have one elementary school in particular that has almost 600 students at it. They have almost 700 students. 600 of them are car riders, and over 70% of them live within walking distance of the school, but there are barriers for that to take place in a safe manner. So we're working in conjunction with the school. They're very supportive of it, and just to see how much traffic congestion can be reduced by providing a more walkable school. And then the benefits, as Ian mentioned earlier, to the students being better prepared to learn and less issues with health. So that's one area that we're working very rapidly on to correct.
Great, thanks. So in addition to the great benefits of healthier children, getting that daily walk, you know, the Centers for Disease Control says that if you just walk 30 minutes a day, then you have a dramatic reduction in your risk of a lot of heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and so on. It's an incredible cure for a lot, or not really a cure, but a prevention for a lot of things to be active. And if kids get in the habit of walking to school, that'll see them through a lifetime. But in addition to that, there's the benefit that the kids actually perform better in school when they've had some exercise in the morning. And there was a discussion earlier today about cities and school officials working more closely together. Any teacher will tell you that. So that's a great opportunity for collaboration. And then, as Jill mentioned, you reduce traffic congestion and increase safety in the area around schools by removing a large number of the cars. Frank, when we spoke on the phone earlier this week, you mentioned that you'd made a point of understanding what kind of community amenities the young generation in El Dorado wants. Why did you do that, and what did you find out?
Well, actually, we can't take a lot of credit other than the fact that we took advantage from the highway department to build a 2.25 mile walking and biking path around our municipal golf course and soccer fields. And lo and behold, it turned out to be a huge hit with everybody. And comes to find out that these later people would rather be out walking and biking than necessarily playing on monkey bars. And so we've now got the plans into effect to build another 4 miles of biking and hiking paths. One of those will be a very challenging kind of a mountain bike path, but they're all connected, and they're all serviced by facilities around. And it's becoming quite a hit with everyone there.
And I think there, Frank, underscoring the fact that these facilities can be both transportation facilities and recreational amenities, and people can use them either way, just for exercise, for relaxation, for going for a walk, or for getting to school or getting to work or going downtown to do some shopping. Rick, I know that you've also been very concerned about the welfare and the lifestyles of young people. Just give us a brief glimpse of your background before getting into politics and how that's influenced some of your policy priorities.
You know, Dan, I was a former educator, 29 years in education. Of course, physical education was a part, and I had a short stint in coaching, but physical education was pretty much my passion. And during that process, I had a bike program that we called mini courses, and we implemented that in our community. And we had 27 Trek mountain bikes that every student now. And since then, after becoming mayor, you know, my passion was to build the Greenway trails, which we have, and also, you know, getting back to the Main Street area. I'd like to say that 90%, we were at about a 50% rate of the stores on Main Street. We've slowed the traffic down. We've made it walkable. It's over 90% occupied now. A lot of the executive committee that attended last year was in the Barnett building, a historic building that was built in 1903. We announced last week a partnership with the county, and our library is going from a 5,000 square foot building to 20,000 plus building in the historic Barnett building. And so we have 2 new restaurants that are opening, and folks are investing in the community. One bank is offering a 0% interest to invest in our Main Street. We have individuals now interested in building loft apartments. We have a new pocket park going in. So Main Street is back. So, and I don't think that would have happened without the help of Dan and Ian. And then, like I said, and I think we've had Dan here before, and Dan's just an old hippie and he's just a cool guy, as well as Ian here. So I highly recommend you guys checking into their services.
Well, Dan's certainly one of my mentors, and he's been doing this work for about 30 or 40 years, since well before almost anybody else was saying, hey, we need to make our communities more walkable, less car-oriented. There were benefits. He was one of the first people in the country to recognize that and to go and make a business out of helping communities that were on the leading edge make that transition. Like I say, 30 or 40 years. He says he's been to 3,500 different cities in America over that time. So just finishing up here on the economic development benefits Rick just touched on. Jill, I know that you had an interesting kind of occurrence in Bryant, even when you just started talking about the Complete Streets policy and building more walkable neighborhoods. Tell us about that.
Ian, that's in relationship to creating our town center. For those of you that have been to Bryant, if somebody said, meet me in Bryant, there's not a town center. There's not an old downtown like Rick has. Bryant grew up so fast, 5,000 to 20,000 people in 2 decades. We weren't the county seat, so we didn't have an established courthouse or a downtown. And the impact that the interstate made on how our city built out since the 1950s just didn't establish that town center. So that's been one of the things that we've found in public outreach that our community really wants is that place, that sense of place. So through Metro Plan, we went through the Jumpstart planning process. Gateway Planning came in, did a lot of charrette type work with the community, lots of input, lots of buy-in from the community, establishing what they wanted, and out of that came a plan. Following that, we received a $2 million grant for intersection improvement monies on Highway 183 to make that area, which really was established as the historic downtown area, but outside of a few commercial buildings and residences, there hasn't really been much development in that area in decades. And so with that plan, we've already seen 2 great little pocket subdivisions come out of the ground, anticipating what's going to happen when those intersection improvements are put in, what's going to happen with the commercial core that has been planned for. This plan allows for slower streets, more sidewalks, street trees, divided medians, and crosswalks connecting our beautiful new high school to what will be our town center in the future. And everybody's really excited about it. There's lots of conversations around it. Last October, we did a pop-up event that was very well attended, considering it rained it hadn't rained in days, and it rained all day long, but we had over 100 people present throughout the day, continually, all day long, and just seeing what it looked like when we restriped the streets, put the trees up, and so there's a lot of energy and excitement about it, and we're excited to see that come out of the ground.
Thanks, Jill. Pop-up events are really great tools. You just use paint, you use temporary planters, you use other structures to reshape the street temporarily, just for one day maybe, so that people can come out and see it and try it out. And it builds support for more permanent changes. And as Jill said, just the planning and the policy and the preparation to make downtown improvements, create more of a downtown in Bryant, led to 2 new developments coming in. This is market forces at work. This is what people want, and people want to live in walkable places. So that leads to more property tax and sales tax as those communities develop, so you can make an investment and get a return. So Frank, I know that jobs is a very important issue in El Dorado. Tell me how all of this walkability focus has affected jobs in El Dorado.
Well, as part of any community, your economic vitality also includes keeping what you have. El Dorado is very fortunate to have a number of large industries there 3 Fortune 500 corporations are headquartered in El Dorado. They're extremely generous to us, and we certainly wouldn't want to lose them. And trying to find out in the area of entertainment and recreation what folks of that caliber would like to do, walking, nature trails, and sports is a big deal. We start off right away by adding 4 quarter-mile walking paths to our 4 primary grade schools for the children. Keep them outside and enjoying themselves. And that's where the biking and the sports complex all comes in. These are focused for everyone, of course, but also to be of a high grade, good nature venue for those types of folks who like to get out. And I might add that the Boy Scouts have gone out and put bird boxes up on the trails. They're interested in them. The Arboretum identifies trees, and it's more than just walking and biking. It's actually an educational event when you do these sorts of things, and we're looking forward to opening up these additional miles of biking and walking paths.
Thank you, Frank. And Rick, you got the last word in this panel. Tell everybody what it has cost or what it's costing Batesville to make the changes that we've talked about over 5 blocks of Main Street, and what you see the kind of potential returns on that investment being.
You know, the cost, and like I said, this has been 100% donated to the city of Batesville. We've had each block sponsored by a different individual, corporation, or banks, and we're looking at like $20,000 per block. And so we're looking $150,000 to put in the streetscape. We did the first block, my city crews did, but now we're getting professionals to come in and do the rest, because we're just like any other city department. We have many other things that we need to be doing, from ditches to water lines. So, but it is actually, and just like Frank and Jill have said, you know, this is the new millennials. They are looking for communities, and our Main Street, it leads, if you've been to the city of Batesville, it's historic homes on the Main Street, the thoroughfare. They're over 100 years old. There's beautiful 2-, 3-, and 4-story homes. Now, when I grew up, it was my friend's parents lived there. Now, a lot of those have died out and moved and gone to nursing homes, and we've got the new millennials that have moved in there. I'm seeing more folks on bikes, people, the young families and strollers pushing their kids down to Main Street, the yogurt shops, the new theater that's open. So this is going to be an economic impact. And like I said, 2 new restaurants, and one of the new restaurants, of course, we have a historic district ordinance, the facade and everything. It's built out of the sandstone. We've got local sandstone there. It's built, it looks just like, in both of the restaurants there, they have reclaimed. I went in the one the other day that come up, the inside of it there, and they had some 100-year-old windows that they'd gotten out of Jonesboro, which was just a very, very cool area. So they're putting everything back in history, and that's going to be a very good economic return for our community.
Well, thank you, Rick, Jill, and Frank. Please stick around in case we got time for questions. Could I have a round of applause for our panelists, please? And I've just got a couple of slides to finish up with here. There are some of the buildings that Rick was talking about in downtown Batesville, including the internal rehab that's going on in one of those buildings. Investment just pouring in as a result of a community-oriented planning process that has revitalized Main Street and revitalizing downtown. I'm going to just leave you with 2 resources to look up. The first is a national resource. The Surgeon General issued a call to action on walking and walkable communities last year based on the public health benefits. And America Walks was an important partner with the Surgeon General on this issue. There are 5 goals that the Surgeon General has laid out to make walking a national priority, design communities that make it safe and easy to walk, promote programs and policies, provide information, and conduct research and evaluation. The U.S. federal government is now working on those goals, as are the state departments of health, right down to the local level. And it's a great way for your community, your public health leaders, to connect with the national movement on walkable communities. And then finally, America Walks is a resource. As Rick mentioned, Dan Burden and I came to Batesville. It's really helpful sometimes to bring outsiders in, because everybody assumes that if you're not from the community, you know more than the people from the community, whether it's true or not. But what we were able to do when we came was to convene a community gathering, to bring examples like I've shown here from other communities, and to facilitate a conversation in which people actually get excited about this, and it kind of sets off some connections in people's heads and they get behind it. It can really build the political support for the kind of changes that might be hard to do otherwise. So America Walks is one of a number of organizations that are available to do this kind of work in communities. Dan Burden is now with a new organization called Blue Zones, and they do something similar. And there are 2 or 3 others that I'd be happy to tell you about as well that come in and assist communities to make this transition. I'm going to be sitting at the circle of seats just by the registration area between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock today. And anybody who wants to come and talk to me about your community, if you have a map, or we can pull it up on your phone, I can kind of share some ideas, as well as kind of making a connection possibly for later on. My contact information is there. Feel free to write that down and give me a call. I am going to hand out, this is a 2-page or a 1-page case study that I wrote about Batesville. I've got a large number of copies of those. I'm going to put those at the back after this session. Feel free to pick one up, and it's also got my business card on. So with that, do we have time for any questions, Rick? Or I think we may...
We're running late.
All right, so just grab us in the hallways throughout the rest of the conference if you have any questions. And thanks very much for your attention for the last hour.